The black pregnant maid heard a baby crying upstairs. When she opened the door, she was dialing 911 in tears. The baby's cry pierced through the silence of the Buckhead mansion like a knife through Jasmine's heart, but there wasn't supposed to be any baby upstairs. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. The morning Georgia sun filtered through the towering windows of the Whitmore estate, casting long shadows across the marble floors that Jasmine Washington had been polishing since dawn. At 7 months pregnant, every movement sent a dull ache through her lower back, but she couldn't afford to slow down. Not with the baby coming and her savings account still looking as empty as her refrigerator back in East Atlanta. She pressed her palm against her rounded belly, feeling the familiar flutter of tiny kicks. "Easy there, little one," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the cavernous foyer. "Mama's got work to do." The Buckhead mansion stood like a monument to wealth and privilege, its Georgian colonial architecture commanding respect from every angle. Jasmine had been cleaning these pristine halls for 8 months now, ever since her previous employer decided they could no longer afford help after her husband's 3rd DUI. The Whitmores paid well, better than anywhere else she'd worked in her 15 years of domestic service, but the house always felt heavy with unspoken secrets. Mrs. Victoria Whitmore descended the curved staircase at exactly 8:30 a.m., as she did every weekday morning. Dressed in a designer pantsuit that probably cost more than Jasmine made in 3 months, she moved with the calculated precision of someone who controlled every aspect of her environment. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. "Good morning, Jasmine," Victoria said, her voice carrying that particular tone of wealthy white women reserved for their help, polite but distant, acknowledging without truly seeing. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore," Jasmine replied, straightening despite the protest in her spine. She'd learned long ago to make herself as invisible as possible in these grand homes, to clean around the edges of other people's lives without leaving any trace of her own presence. Victoria paused at the bottom of the stairs, her manicured fingers gripping the banister perhaps a little too tightly. For a moment something flickered across her face, a crack in the perfect facade, but it disappeared so quickly Jasmine wondered if she'd imagined it. "Mr. Whitmore left for his business trip to Charlotte this morning," Victoria announced, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "I'll be at the country club until this afternoon." The usual Thursday routine. Jasmine nodded, familiar with the pattern. Thursdays meant she'd have the house to herself until evening, free to work at her own pace without tiptoeing around the Whitmores' carefully orchestrated life. It also meant she could rest when her body demanded it, something her pride rarely allowed her to do when others were watching. As Victoria's BMW pulled out of the circular driveway, Jasmine allowed herself a moment to breathe. She leaned against the cool marble of the entrance hall, closing her eyes and listening to the silence settle around her like a blanket. These moments of solitude in the big house were precious, times when she could almost pretend she belonged in a world of beauty and comfort, where her child might grow up surrounded by books and art instead of worry and want. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and Jasmine smiled. "You're going to have better than this, baby girl," she promised, though she couldn't be certain about the gender. "Mama's going to make sure of it." She made her way toward the kitchen, planning to tackle the breakfast dishes before moving upstairs to dust the bedrooms. The Whitmores' kitchen was a testament to excess. Granite countertops, professional-grade appliances, and enough space to feed an army. Yet Victoria rarely cooked, surviving mainly on salads from expensive downtown Atlanta restaurants and whatever catered affairs she attended at the Piedmont Driving Club. As Jasmine began loading the dishwasher, she noticed something unusual. 2 coffee cups sat in the sink instead of the usual one. Victoria always drank her morning coffee alone. Black, no sugar, from the delicate china set she'd inherited from her grandmother. But this second cup was different. Larger, sturdier, the kind of mug someone might use for comfort rather than ceremony. A small detail, perhaps, but in a house where every object had its place and purpose, anomalies stood out like discordant notes in a symphony. Jasmine filed the observation away, her intuition picking up on the subtle wrongness that seemed to permeate the mansion's perfect facade. What secrets do you think the wealthy hide behind their perfect lives? Share your thoughts below. Have you ever noticed small details that revealed bigger truths? 20 minutes later, with the kitchen restored to its pristine state, Jasmine climbed the servants' staircase to the second floor. The Whitmore home had 5 bedrooms, though only the master suite showed signs of regular use. The others remained museum-perfect, guest rooms waiting for visitors who rarely came, children's rooms that had never housed children. Or so she had thought. The hallway stretched before her like a challenge, doors closed against secrets she'd never been invited to discover. She'd cleaned this floor dozens of times, following the same route, touching the same surfaces, maintaining the same respectful distance from whatever private dramas unfolded behind closed doors. But today felt different. Today, the silence seemed expectant, pregnant with possibility, much like herself. As she approached the master bedroom with her cleaning supplies, Jasmine paused. Something had changed in the quality of the quiet. The house held its breath around her, and in that suspended moment she heard it. A baby's cry. Soft at first, barely distinguishable from the whisper of wind through the eaves. Then louder, more insistent, the unmistakable wail of an infant in distress. Jasmine's heart stopped, then began racing double time. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, where her own child seemed to respond to the distant crying with urgent kicks. The sound was coming from upstairs, from the 3rd floor that she'd never been asked to clean, the level of the house that remained mysteriously off-limits. Every instinct screamed at her to investigate, to follow the maternal pull that transcended employment boundaries and social hierarchies. But another voice, the practical voice that had kept her employed and safe for 15 years, warned her to mind her own business, to pretend she hadn't heard anything. The crying continued, heartbroken and desperate, and Jasmine felt tears spring to her own eyes. Somewhere above her, a baby needed help, and she was the only one here to provide it. Her feet moved before her mind could object, carrying her toward the narrow staircase she'd passed countless times but never climbed. The wood creaked under her weight as she ascended, each step taking her further from the safety of ignorance and deeper into whatever truth the Whitmore family had been hiding in their tower of privilege. At the top of the stairs, a single door stood slightly ajar, and from behind it came the sound that had called to every maternal fiber in her being. Jasmine reached for the handle with trembling fingers, knowing that whatever lay beyond would change everything. The door swung open, and the world tilted on its axis. The room beyond the door was bathed in soft morning light filtering through gauze curtains, but what Jasmine saw made her blood run cold. In the center of the space sat a makeshift nursery, a crib, changing table, and rocking chair arranged with desperate care. And in that crib, a baby no more than 3 months old lay crying, her tiny fists flailing against blankets that reeked of neglect. But it wasn't just any baby. Even through her tears and distress, Jasmine could see the telltale signs, the shallow breathing, the grayish pallor around the infant's lips, the way her little chest worked too hard with each breath. This child was sick, dangerously so, and had been left alone for God only knew how long. "Oh, sweet Jesus," Jasmine whispered, rushing forward. Her cleaning supplies clattered to the floor as she reached into the crib, her hands shaking as she lifted the fragile bundle. The baby was burning with fever, her tiny body trembling against Jasmine's chest. The smell hit her then, not just the odor of soiled diapers, but something deeper, more troubling. The scent of illness, of a child who hadn't been properly cared for. Empty formula bottles lay scattered on the floor beside clothes that hadn't been changed in days. A baby monitor sat silent and unplugged in the corner. "Who did this to you, baby?" Jasmine murmured, cradling the infant against her own swollen belly. The child's crying had softened to weak whimpers, and that scared Jasmine more than the screaming had. Sick babies who stopped crying were babies who were giving up. Her own pregnancy seemed to pulse in response, her unborn daughter moving restlessly as if sensing the distress of the child in her mother's arms. Jasmine had worked in enough households to recognize the signs. This wasn't neglect born of ignorance or poverty. This was something far more sinister. The nursery told a story of secret preparation and hidden shame. Everything was expensive but hastily assembled, as if someone had tried to create a proper space for a child they couldn't acknowledge. Pink clothes hung in a small closet, never worn. Unopened packages of diapers and formula sat stacked against one wall, while others lay empty and discarded. Jasmine's mind raced as she bounced the feverish baby gently, trying to soothe her distress. Mrs. Whitmore had never mentioned a baby. In 8 months of employment, there had been no indication that a child lived in this house. No toys, no childproofing, no evidence whatsoever of an infant's presence. Yet here was proof that someone had been caring for this baby. Poorly, secretly, but caring nonetheless. The question was who, and why the secrecy? The baby's breathing grew more labored, and Jasmine felt panic rise in her throat. This child needed medical attention immediately. Whatever family drama or shame had led to this situation, it could wait. A baby's life hung in the balance. She fumbled for her phone with one hand while supporting the infant with the other. Her fingers shook as she dialed 911, her voice breaking as the operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? I need an ambulance, Jasmine said, tears streaming down her face. I found a baby. She's sick, burning up with fever. She's been alone and I don't know for how long. Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. What's your location? Jasmine rattled off the Buckhead address, her voice gaining strength as her protective instincts took over. I'm on the 3rd floor. The baby is maybe 3 months old, African American, and she's in distress. Her breathing is shallow and she has a high fever. Is this your child, ma'am? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Jasmine looked down at the baby in her arms. Dark skin like her own, tiny features that could belong to any number of families, including hers. At that moment, genetics didn't matter. This child needed a mother, and she was here. She needs help, Jasmine said firmly, not exactly answering the question. Please hurry. As she provided more details to the operator, staying on the line as instructed, Jasmine's mind began to piece together the impossible puzzle. Mrs. Victoria Whitmore, with her perfect blonde hair and designer clothes, cared for a black baby in secret. The extra coffee cup in the kitchen. The nervous energy she displayed that morning. The way she gripped the banister just a little too tightly. The baby stirred against Jasmine's chest, her dark eyes opening for a moment to focus on the face above her. In that instant, something passed between them, a recognition that transcended blood and circumstance. This child had been waiting for someone to find her, someone to care for, someone to fight for her life. It's okay, sweet girl, Jasmine whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Mama's here now. You're not alone anymore. The words came naturally, without thought or hesitation. In the space of 10 minutes, everything had changed. She was no longer just Jasmine Washington, the invisible maid who cleaned around the edges of other people's lives. She was a woman holding a dying baby, making split-second decisions that would ripple through multiple lives. Her own unborn child kicked hard, as if responding to the presence of the infant in her arms. 2 babies, both in need of protection, both dependent on her strength and courage. The weight of responsibility settled around her shoulders like a mantle, heavy but not unwelcome. Through the third-floor window, she could see the manicured lawns of Buckhead stretching toward the Atlanta skyline. Somewhere out there, ambulances were racing toward this moment, toward this secret room where a baby fought for her life. And somewhere else, Victoria Whitmore was going about her Thursday routine, unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to crumble. The baby's breathing grew shallower, and Jasmine felt tears sliding down her cheeks onto the child's fevered forehead. "Stay with me, baby girl. Help is coming. Just stay with me." In the distance, she could hear the first wail of sirens cutting through the morning quiet of the exclusive neighborhood. Soon, this house would be filled with paramedics and questions, with the harsh light of scrutiny illuminating secrets that had festered in darkness. But for now, in this moment suspended between discovery and revelation, there was only Jasmine and the baby, 2 hearts beating against each other, one strong and steady, the other fragile but fighting. Whatever came next, whatever explanations or consequences awaited, this connection had been forged in crisis and sealed with tears. The sirens grew louder, and Jasmine Washington prepared to step out of the shadows forever. Can you imagine discovering something that would change your life forever? What would you do if you found yourself in Jasmine's situation? Share your thoughts below. The silence in Victoria Whitmore's BMW was deafening as she sat in the Piedmont Driving Club parking lot, her phone clutched in white-knuckled hands. The call from Jasmine had shattered her carefully constructed Thursday morning routine, and now reality was crashing down around her like the walls of a house of cards. "Mrs. Whitmore, you need to come home right now. The police. The ambulance. There's a baby." Victoria's mind reeled, rejecting what she'd heard. There was no baby. There couldn't be a baby. She'd made sure of that 3 months ago when she'd driven her 17-year-old daughter Lily to that discreet clinic in Savannah, far enough from Atlanta's social circles to avoid whispered gossip at the country club. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, her perfectly applied makeup beginning to smudge with perspiration. The story she'd crafted so carefully, Lily's study abroad program in Switzerland, the private boarding school that would keep her away until the scandal blew over, it had all been a lie built on lies. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Jasmine. "Please hurry. She needs her mama." "No," Victoria whispered to the empty car. "This isn't happening." But even as she denied it, images flashed through her mind. Lily's baggy clothes over the past months. The way she'd started avoiding family dinners. The mysterious doctor's appointments Victoria had assumed were for depression or an eating disorder. Anything but this. Victoria's hands shook as she started the engine. She'd built her entire life on control, on maintaining appearances, on making sure the Whitmore name remained untarnished in Atlanta's elite social circles. Her husband Richard couldn't know. Her mother-in-law, the formidable Margaret Whitmore who ruled Buckhead society with an iron fist, absolutely could never find out. As she drove through the tree-lined streets toward home, Victoria's mind scrambled for explanations, excuses, ways to contain this disaster. Maybe the baby belonged to someone else. Maybe Lily had been babysitting in secret. Maybe. The sight of the ambulance and police car in her circular driveway stopped her thoughts cold. Back inside the mansion, Jasmine sat in the formal living room, her hands still trembling as she cradled a cup of tea that Officer Martinez had insisted she drink. The EMTs had taken the baby, Emma, the hospital bracelet had read, to Grady Hospital for observation, though the infant appeared healthy despite being left alone for what might have been hours. "You did the right thing, ma'am," Officer Martinez said gently. He was younger than Jasmine had expected, probably not much older than Lily Whitmore, with kind eyes that reminded her of her brother Marcus back in Macon. "That baby could have been in serious danger if you hadn't found her." Jasmine nodded, but her mind kept replaying the moment she'd opened that door. The nursery had been beautiful. Expensive furniture, designer decorations, everything a wealthy family could provide. But it had also been hidden, secret, like shame given physical form. "The girl upstairs," Jasmine asked quietly. "Is she going to be okay?" "The paramedics are with her now. She's severely dehydrated and appears to have given birth recently without proper medical care. We're trying to piece together what happened, but she's not very responsive." Through the tall windows, Jasmine saw Victoria's BMW pull into the driveway with the aggressive speed of someone fleeing a crime scene. She watched as her employer sat motionless in the driver's seat for several long moments before finally emerging, her usual composure replaced by something that looked like terror. "That's Mrs. Whitmore," Jasmine told the officer. "The lady of the house." Officer Martinez nodded and moved toward the foyer to intercept Victoria before she could reach the stairs. Jasmine remained in the living room, but she could hear every word of the conversation that followed. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Martinez with Atlanta PD. We need to discuss the situation we found in your home today." "I don't understand." Victoria's voice was higher than usual, strained with barely controlled panic. "Jasmine called about some kind of emergency, but I don't know what." "Mrs. Whitmore, we found a newborn infant and a teenage girl in a third-floor room. The girl appears to have given birth recently without medical assistance. Can you tell me about your daughter Lily?" The silence stretched so long that Jasmine wondered if Victoria had simply collapsed. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Lily is in Switzerland. She's been studying abroad for months." "Ma'am, we have identification that suggests otherwise. The girl upstairs has a Georgia driver's license with this address. Her name is Lily Whitmore." Another crushing silence. "I need to see her," Victoria finally said. But Officer Martinez's response was firm. "I'm afraid that's not possible right now. She's receiving medical attention, and we need to understand the circumstances that led to this situation. When did you last see your daughter?" Jasmine heard footsteps in the foyer, the sound of Victoria pacing like a caged animal. "This is insane. There has to be some mistake. Lily is in Zurich, at the international school. I can show you the enrollment papers, the tuition payments." "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to need you to sit down. This is clearly a shock, but we need honest answers if we're going to help your daughter and ensure the baby's safety." From her position in the living room, Jasmine could see Victoria's reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looked like she was watching her entire world crumble, her face cycling through denial, anger, and something that might have been grief. She was supposed to. Victoria started, then stopped. "The clinic said. They assured me." "What clinic, ma'am?" "Nothing. I didn't say anything about the clinic. But the damage was done." Jasmine saw Officer Martinez exchange a look with his partner, Detective Williams, who had just come downstairs. "Mrs. Whitmore," Detective Williams said in a voice that brooked no argument, "we need you to come to the station to answer some questions. There are serious concerns about the welfare of both the infant and the young woman upstairs." "You don't understand," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "I was protecting her. I was protecting our family. If people knew, if Richard's mother found out, it would destroy everything we've built." "Ma'am, a baby was left alone for hours, possibly days. A teenager gave birth without medical supervision. Whatever you thought you were protecting, it nearly cost 2 lives." Jasmine closed her eyes, feeling the weight of tragedy settling over the beautiful house like dust over abandoned furniture. She thought about her own pregnancy, about the joy and terror of bringing new life into the world, about the fierce love that made mothers do impossible things. But this wasn't love. This was fear masquerading as protection, shame dressed up as propriety. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor. "How's work today, honey?" Jasmine looked around the marble foyer, at the crystal chandelier and Persian rugs, at the life of luxury that had concealed such desperate secrets. She typed back, "Different than usual. Pray for us." As Victoria was led away for questioning, still insisting that there had to be some mistake, Jasmine remained in the living room. The EMTs had finished their work upstairs, and soon she would be alone in the mansion again, but everything had changed. The house felt different now, like a wound that had been lanced. The secrets were out, bleeding into the pristine spaces, staining the perfection with truth. Jasmine placed her hand on her belly, feeling her own baby's strong kicks, and made a silent promise. Whatever happened next, whatever chaos this day had unleashed, she would make sure that little Emma and broken Lily weren't forgotten in the wreckage of the Whitmore family's careful lies. Sometimes the people who needed protection most were the ones whose protectors had failed them first. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting new shadows across familiar rooms, and Jasmine began to understand that her role in this story was far from over. The emergency room at Grady Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across worried faces and tired medical staff. Jasmine sat rigidly in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline that had carried her through the last 2 hours. The baby, little Emma, as the paramedics had learned from Victoria's tearful confession, was stable now, receiving treatment for severe dehydration and malnutrition in the pediatric intensive care unit. Victoria occupied the chair beside her, no longer the polished socialite who descended marble staircases in designer suits. Her mascara had long since streaked down her cheeks, her perfect chignon had collapsed into disheveled strands, and her hands shook as she clutched a paper cup of terrible hospital coffee. The transformation was so complete that several nurses had mistaken Jasmine for the baby's mother and Victoria for a concerned family friend. "Mrs. Whitmore," Jasmine said softly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them like a chasm. "The social worker's gonna be back soon. You need to tell me what's really happening here." Victoria's laugh was hollow, bitter. "What's happening? My world is ending, Jasmine. Everything I've worked to build, to hide, to protect, it's all falling apart because I couldn't keep my own daughter safe." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Jasmine was still trying to process. Emma was Victoria's daughter. Not a kidnapped child, not some terrible crime, but a secret so devastating that Victoria had hidden her own baby in the attic of their Buckhead mansion. "She's yours," Jasmine whispered, more to herself than to Victoria. "That beautiful little girl is your baby." Victoria nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "Richard doesn't know. He can't know. He made it very clear when we got married that children weren't part of his plan. His first wife left him because she wanted a family, and he swore he'd never go through that again. When I found out I was pregnant." She trailed off, her voice breaking. Jasmine's own baby kicked strongly, as if responding to the emotional turmoil surrounding them. She pressed her palm against her belly, thinking about the tiny life growing inside her and the impossible choices that desperation could force upon a mother. "So you hid the pregnancy?" "For 9 months. I told everyone I was taking time to focus on my charity work, and spent most of my time at the family cabin in Blue Ridge Mountains. Had her there with a private midwife who promised discretion." Victoria's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I thought I could figure something out. Find a way to tell Richard, or maybe." She couldn't finish the sentence. Maybe what? Give her away. Jasmine felt a surge of anger mixed with sympathy. That baby deserves better than being hidden away like some shameful secret. "You think I don't know that?" Victoria snapped, then immediately softened. "I'm sorry. I don't have the right to be angry at you. You saved her life today. I was so scared, so overwhelmed. I've been trying to take care of her myself, sneaking formula and diapers, but I don't know what I'm doing. I've never had to care for anyone but myself." The social worker, Ms. Rodriguez, appeared in the doorway with a clipboard and the kind of expression that suggested she'd seen every variation of human dysfunction. "Ladies, I need to speak with you both about Emma's situation. Is there somewhere private we can talk?" They were led to a small conference room that smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. Ms. Rodriguez settled across from them, her kind eyes taking in Victoria's disheveled appearance and Jasmine's protective posture. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation," the social worker began. Emma was severely malnourished and dehydrated when she arrived. If Ms. Washington hadn't found her when she did, we could be having a very different conversation. Victoria flinched as if she'd been slapped. "I was doing my best. I didn't know how to. I've never taken care of a baby before. The living conditions we documented are unacceptable for an infant. No proper ventilation, inadequate temperature control, makeshift sleeping arrangements." Ms. Rodriguez's tone was professional but not unkind. "We're going to need to place Emma in protective custody while we investigate." "No." Victoria's cry was raw, desperate. "Please, you don't understand. I love her. I didn't know how to make it work." Jasmine found herself speaking before she could think better of it. What if she didn't have to go into the system? What if there was another way? Both women turned to look at her, and Jasmine felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. Her practical mind screamed warnings about getting involved, about the complications and risks, but her heart was already committed to the path ahead. "I could help," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I know about babies. I've been preparing for my own, reading everything, taking classes at the community center in Decatur. Emma needs someone who can care for her properly while Mrs. Whitmore figures things out." Ms. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting some kind of informal arrangement? Because I have to tell you, the state takes child welfare very seriously." "Not informal," Jasmine said quickly. "Official. Temporary guardianship or foster care, whatever needs to happen legally. But she could stay with me, in my apartment near Ponce City Market. It's small but it's clean and safe and—" She looked directly at Victoria. "I could teach you. Show you how to take care of her properly." Victoria stared at her with something approaching wonder. "You would do that? After everything? You barely know us." "I know that baby needs someone to fight for her," Jasmine replied simply. "And I know what it's like to be scared about being a mother. Maybe we could figure it out together. The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and risk in equal measure. Ms. Rodriguez made notes on her clipboard, clearly processing the unexpected turn in what had seemed like a straightforward case of neglect. This would require background checks, home visits, court approval, the social worker said slowly. And Mrs. Whitmore, you'd need to demonstrate that you're committed to learning proper childcare and creating a safe environment. Yes, Victoria said immediately. Whatever it takes. I'll do whatever it takes. Jasmine felt her baby kick again, stronger this time, and wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or taking the first step toward something that could save them all. There's one condition, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. What's that? Victoria asked. No more secrets. No more hiding. If we're going to do this, if we're going to help Emma, then everything has to be out in the open. Your husband, your family, everyone needs to know the truth. Victoria's face went pale. Richard will leave me. He'll divorce me and take everything. Maybe, Jasmine acknowledged. But secrets have a way of destroying everything eventually anyway. At least this way, Emma gets a chance at real life. The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of the hospital. Monitors beeping, pages over the intercom, the steady rhythm of life continuing despite the small dramas playing out in conference rooms and beside bedsides. Finally, Victoria nodded. Okay, you're right. No more secrets. Ms. Rodriguez closed her folder with a decisive snap. I'll need to make some calls and start the paperwork. This is highly unusual, but given the circumstances and Ms. Washington's willingness to step in. She stood up. We'll need to move quickly. I can have the temporary placement papers ready by tomorrow morning if everything checks out. As the social worker left them alone again, Jasmine and Victoria sat in the strange intimacy that crisis creates between strangers. The class differences that had separated them in the Buckhead mansion seemed less important here in the sterile hospital room where they were just two women trying to do right by a baby who needed them. Why? Victoria asked quietly. Why would you risk everything to help us? Jasmine considered the question, thinking about her own childhood in East Point, raised by a grandmother who cleaned houses while her mother struggled with addiction. She thought about the women who had helped them along the way, teachers who stayed after school, neighbors who shared meals, strangers who showed kindness when it was needed most. Because somebody helped me once when I needed it, she said finally. And because that little girl deserves better than what both of us had planned for her. Victoria's tears came fresh then, but they were different, cleaner somehow, like rain washing away dust. I don't even know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet, Jasmine said with a tired smile. We've got a long road ahead of us. And first thing tomorrow, you're calling your husband and telling him the truth. Victoria nodded, fear and determination warring in her expression. What if he leaves? Then you'll figure out how to be a mother without him, Jasmine said simply. But at least Emma will have a chance to grow up knowing she was wanted, even if it took a while for everyone to figure out how to show it. Outside the conference room window, Atlanta's skyline glittered in the evening light. A city built on reinvention, on the possibility that people could change and grow and become better than they were. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, two women from different worlds bound together by the urgent need of one small child, it felt like anything might be possible. The rain had started again outside, drumming against the windows of the guest bedroom where Jasmine and Victoria sat in the aftermath of their fragile truce. Baby Emma slept peacefully in the makeshift crib they'd fashioned from dresser drawers and soft linens, her tiny chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of innocent dreams. Victoria stared at her hands, still trembling from the adrenaline of the paramedics' visit and the weight of secrets finally spoken aloud. The silence between the two women stretched like a bridge neither was certain could hold their combined burdens. "There's more," Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "About why I couldn't." Jasmine shifted uncomfortably in the antique chair, her pregnancy making every position a negotiation with gravity and pain. But something in Victoria's tone made her lean forward despite the discomfort, recognizing the sound of a dam about to burst. "You don't have to," Jasmine began, but Victoria held up a trembling hand. "No, I do. You saved her life today, Jasmine. You deserve to know why she needed saving." Victoria stood and walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. The Buckhead neighborhood stretched below them, a parade of perfect lawns and hidden sorrows. "My first pregnancy was 7 years ago. We were so happy, Richard and I, young and stupid and convinced we had it all figured out." She turned back to face Jasmine, and in the dim light, she looked decades older than her 34 years. His name was going to be Michael. We had everything ready. The nursery painted blue, the crib assembled, tiny clothes washed and folded. I used to talk to him every night, telling him about all the places we'd go together, all the things I'd teach him. Jasmine's hand moved instinctively to her own belly, feeling the familiar flutter of life within. She'd done the same thing, whispered promises to her unborn daughter about a better future, about love that would never waver. At 36 weeks, the doctor couldn't find his heartbeat. Victoria's voice cracked like ice under pressure. "Stillborn. That's what they called it, like it was just a medical term instead of the end of everything I thought I knew about myself." The rain grew heavier, matching the tempo of Victoria's tears. Richard tried to be supportive, but I could see it in his eyes, the blame. Like it was something I'd done wrong, some failure of my body, my worthiness as a mother. We tried again twice more. Both times I lost them before 20 weeks. Jasmine closed her eyes, feeling the phantom ache of losses she'd never experienced but somehow understood. Every woman who'd ever carried life knew this fear, the terrible vulnerability of loving someone before you'd ever held them. The doctors said it was just bad luck, that there was nothing preventing me from having a healthy pregnancy. But I knew better. I knew I was broken somehow, cursed. Richard started traveling more for work, first to Charleston, then Charlotte, then anywhere but home with his defective wife. Victoria moved to a small secretary desk in the corner and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with documents and photographs. 6 months ago, I was at a charity luncheon downtown at the Georgian Terrace Hotel. One of those awful affairs where Atlanta's elite pretend to care about poverty while sipping champagne that costs more than most people's rent. She pulled out a photograph, a young woman barely 18, with kind eyes and a smile that spoke of dreams yet to be crushed. Her name was Rebecca. She was there serving tables, working her way through Georgia State. She looked so much like I did at her age, before life taught me that wanting something didn't make you worthy of having it. Jasmine studied the photograph, seeing the ghost of Victoria's younger self in the girl's hopeful expression. What happened to her? She was pregnant, unmarried, abandoned by the baby's father when she told him. Her family had disowned her, strict religious types who saw her condition as a moral failing. Victoria's voice turned bitter. Sounds familiar? Seems like society has lots of ways to punish women for the audacity of creating life. She pulled out more documents. Legal papers, medical records, correspondence. I offered her money at first, just intended to help with medical bills, maybe find her a better job. But she was so scared, so alone. And I saw an opportunity. The pieces began falling into place in Jasmine's mind, creating a picture that was both beautiful and terrible in its complexity. You offered to adopt the baby. More than that. I offered her a place to stay, medical care, anything she needed. Richard was traveling constantly, and this house felt like a mausoleum anyway. She moved into the 3rd floor, and for 5 months I pretended I was pregnant. Wore padding, bought maternity clothes, told everyone at the country club that I was finally expecting again. Victoria's hands shook as she continued pulling items from the envelope. Rebecca was so grateful, so trusting. She'd talk to the baby every night just like I used to do, telling her stories, singing lullabies. We'd sit together in the evenings, comparing notes on morning sickness and cravings, planning for the future. For a while, I almost forgot which one of us was really pregnant. And when the baby came? Jasmine asked, though she dreaded the answer. Rebecca went into labor 3 days ago, Tuesday night. Richard was in Charlotte closing some deal, and I was here alone with her. She labored for 18 hours. Brave as anything, never complaining. When Emma finally arrived, she was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, the most beautiful cry I'd ever heard. Victoria sat back down, clutching a smaller photograph. Rebecca holding a newborn Emma, both of them glowing with exhaustion and joy. Rebecca held her for exactly 3 minutes. Then she looked at me and said, "Take care of my angel. Love her enough for both of us." And she was gone within the hour. Hemorrhaged. I tried to stop the bleeding, called 911, but it was too late. The room fell silent except for the rain and Emma's gentle breathing. Jasmine felt the weight of tragedy settling around them like fog, understanding now why Victoria had seemed so brittle, so desperate. Richard came home yesterday morning to find me with a baby I couldn't explain. I told him she was ours, that I'd given birth while he was away. He was suspicious, demanded to see medical records, wanted to know why I hadn't called him, why there was no hospital bracelet. Victoria's laugh was hollow and broken. Turns out it's hard to fake having given birth. Your body doesn't cooperate with the lie. She pulled out the final document, Rebecca's death certificate, stamped and official. When he realized what I'd done, he went into a rage. Called me insane, dangerous. Said he wouldn't be party to whatever fraud I was committing. He left for another business trip this morning, told me to figure it out before he got back on Sunday. "So you've been alone with Emma since yesterday?" Jasmine asked, her heart breaking for both women. The one who died and the one left behind to carry an impossible burden. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't take her to the hospital without explaining where she came from. Couldn't register her birth without Rebecca's cooperation. Couldn't even feed her properly because my body won't produce milk for a baby that isn't biologically mine. Victoria's voice cracked completely. I was going to call social services this morning, surrender her to the state. At least then she'd have a chance. "But you couldn't do it," Jasmine said softly. Every time I picked up the phone, I'd look at her face and see Rebecca. Hear her voice saying, "Love her enough for both of us." How could I abandon the last piece of the only person who ever looked at me and saw a real mother? Emma stirred in her makeshift crib, making soft baby sounds that tugged at both women's hearts. Jasmine reached over and gently stroked the infant's cheek, marveling at the softness of new life. "Rebecca was right about one thing," Jasmine said quietly. "You are a real mother. Maybe not the way you planned, maybe not the way society expects, but real nonetheless. The way you've been protecting her, caring for her even when it seemed impossible. That's what mothers do. Victoria looked up through her tears, seeing something in Jasmine's eyes that she'd never encountered before. Not pity, not judgment, but recognition. Understanding from one mother to another, across all the lines that usually divided them. "What happens now?" Victoria whispered. "What would you do if you discovered someone's desperate attempt to become a mother? Share your thoughts on the impossible choices people make for love." Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, and the first hints of afternoon sunlight were breaking through the clouds. In the guest bedroom of the Buckhead mansion, two women sat with a baby who belonged to both of them and neither, bound together by circumstances that had forced them to see past the barriers of race, class, and expectation. Emma opened her eyes and looked up at them with the profound wisdom that only newborns possess, as if she already understood that families weren't always born but sometimes forged in the crucible of crisis and compassion. In her gaze, both women saw the possibility of something new. Not the families they'd planned for, but the one that life had unexpectedly offered them. The rain stopped completely, and Jasmine felt her own baby kick with unusual strength, as if responding to the presence of the tiny soul sleeping nearby. Whatever came next, whatever legal complications and social judgments awaited them, this moment held something precious and irreplaceable. A chance for redemption. A possibility for love that transcended every boundary society had tried to build between them. And in the silence that followed, both women began to hope. The soft glow of the nursery lamp cast gentle shadows across the walls as Jasmine and Victoria sat together on the plush carpet, little Michael sleeping peacefully between them. For the first time since discovering the hidden room, the crying had stopped completely. The baby's breathing was steady and calm, his tiny chest rising and falling in the rhythm of natural sleep. Victoria's transformation was remarkable. Gone was the Ice Queen facade, replaced by a vulnerable woman whose eyes held the weight of unbearable loss. She reached out tentatively and touched Michael's tiny hand, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to sit here for hours," she said, her fingers tracing the soft curve of his palm, just watching him breathe, terrified that if I looked away, even for a second, he might. She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Jasmine shifted closer, her own pregnancy making the floor uncomfortable, but she wouldn't dream of moving away from this moment of raw honesty. "How long has it been since his mama passed?" 3 weeks. Victoria's voice cracked like glass. 3 weeks, 2 days, and God, I count the hours sometimes. Sarah was my sister-in-law, but she was more like the sister I never had. When she got pregnant, I was so excited to be an aunt. I bought all of this. She gestured around the beautifully appointed nursery, before she was even showing. The irony wasn't lost on Jasmine. Here she was, pregnant and struggling to afford basic necessities for her own child, sitting in a nursery that cost more than most people's cars. But instead of resentment, she felt only compassion for this woman whose wealth couldn't protect her from the cruelest losses life could deliver. "She must have been very special," Jasmine said softly. Victoria nodded, tears spilling freely now. She was radiant. Even when the doctors told us about the complications, she just kept saying that love would be enough. That Michael would know he was wanted, no matter what happened to her. Michael stirred in his sleep, and both women froze, afraid to disturb his peace. When he settled again, Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger with each memory shared. "Charles, my husband, he fell apart when Sarah died. He couldn't even look at Michael without breaking down. Said the baby reminded him too much of what we'd lost. So I moved Michael up here. Told Charles he was staying with Sarah's parents in Savannah until we could figure things out. But he's been here all along, Jasmine said, the pieces finally clicking into place. I hired a night nurse. Mrs. Patterson comes from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., Monday through Friday. I told her Charles knew, told her it was temporary until we found permanent arrangements. But the truth is... Victoria's voice broke again. I couldn't let him go. He's all I have left of Sarah, and I know she'd want him to be loved, not shuffled off to relatives who barely knew her. Jasmine felt a familiar flutter in her belly as her own baby responded to the emotional intensity of the moment. She placed both hands on her stomach, and Victoria noticed the gesture. When are you due? Victoria asked, and for the first time, her question came from genuine interest rather than polite obligation. 6 weeks, Jasmine replied. It's a girl, I think. At least, that's what my heart tells me. Do you have everything you need? I mean, really need it. The question hung between them, loaded with implications that stretched far beyond the usual employer-employee dynamic. Jasmine had spent 8 months in this house, cleaning around the edges of Victoria's life, and now suddenly they were 2 women, 2 mothers, sharing the most fundamental of human experiences. I'll manage, Jasmine said carefully. I always do. Victoria studied her for a long moment, seeing her perhaps for the first time as more than just another household employee. You're doing this alone, aren't you? Jasmine's jaw tightened slightly. She'd learned to be wary of pity, especially from wealthy white women who thought they understood struggle but had never missed a meal or worried about keeping the lights on. But there was something different in Victoria's eyes, recognition rather than condescension. The baby's daddy, he. Jasmine paused, choosing her words carefully. Let's just say he made it clear that fatherhood wasn't part of his plans. So yeah, it's just me and her against the world. That must be terrifying. The simple acknowledgement, free of judgment or platitudes about everything working out for the best, broke something loose in Jasmine's chest. Some days I wake up and I can barely breathe from the fear, she admitted. Not about the birth or the baby herself. I know I'll love her fiercely. But the rest of it, how I'm going to afford daycare so I can keep working, whether I'll be able to give her the opportunity she deserves, if I'm strong enough to be everything she needs. Victoria reached out and touched Jasmine's arm, the first time she'd ever initiated physical contact between them. You are. Strong enough, I mean. Anyone can see that just by looking at you. Michael made a small sound in his sleep, and both women turned their attention back to him. In the soft light, his mixed-race features were beautiful. Sarah's delicate bone structure blended with something else, creating a child who would grow up navigating multiple worlds just as Jasmine's daughter would. What will happen to him? Jasmine asked. I mean, long-term? Victoria's face clouded over. I don't know. Charles is scheduled to return from Charlotte next week, and he's expecting me to tell him that Michael has been placed appropriately. Those were his exact words. Placed appropriately, like he's a piece of furniture instead of a child who needs love. And if you don't, then I lose everything. My marriage, my social standing, probably this house since most of our assets are in Charles's name. But if I do... She looked down at the sleeping baby, her voice growing fierce with protective love. If I do, then Michael loses the only mother he has left. The weight of Victoria's impossible choice settled between them like a third presence in the room. Jasmine understood, perhaps better than anyone, the brutal calculations women had to make when love collided with survival. Sometimes the right choice and the safe choice aren't the same thing, Jasmine said quietly. No, they're not. Victoria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her perfect makeup for the first time since Jasmine had known her. I keep thinking about what Sarah would want. She was always so brave, so willing to fight for what mattered. And she trusted me to take care of him if anything happened to her. Michael opened his eyes then, those remarkable gray-green eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. He looked up at both women with calm curiosity, as if he understood that this conversation would determine the course of his young life. Without thinking, Jasmine reached out and let him wrap his tiny fingers around her thumb. The connection was immediate and profound. This child who had called to her maternal instincts from the moment she'd heard his cry, now grounding her in a way that transcended every boundary that should have existed between them. "He knows," Victoria whispered, watching the interaction with wonder. "He knows you're the one who saved him today." "We both did," Jasmine corrected gently. "You've been saving him for 3 weeks. I just heard him calling and couldn't ignore it." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Two women from different worlds united by their shared commitment to protecting innocent life. The nursery felt like a sanctuary, removed from the harsh realities waiting beyond its walls, the judgments, the financial pressures, the impossible choices that would have to be made. Finally, Victoria spoke again, her voice tentative but determined. "Jasmine, I need to ask you something, and I need you to know that whatever you decide, your job here is secure. But—" She paused, gathering courage for whatever she was about to propose. "I can't keep lying to Charles, and I can't keep Michael hidden away like some shameful secret. But I also can't bear the thought of losing him. So I've been thinking, what if there was another way? What if someone could help me take care of him? Someone who understands what it means to fight for a child's future." Jasmine's heart began to race as she understood what Victoria was suggesting. The implications were staggering, not just for her own situation, but for the baby she carried and the life she'd been struggling to build. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm asking if you'd consider staying. Not just as my housekeeper, but as Michael's, as part of his family. I know it's crazy, I know there are a million reasons why it couldn't work, but—" "But maybe," Jasmine said softly, her thumb still captured by Michael's tiny grip, "sometimes crazy is exactly what a situation needs. What would you do if someone offered to change your entire life in one conversation? Drop your thoughts below. Do you think Jasmine should trust Victoria's offer? The future stretched before them, uncertain but filled with possibility. 2 mothers, 2 children, and a bond forged in crisis that might just be strong enough to weather whatever storms lay ahead. In the soft glow of the nursery lamp, surrounded by the peaceful breathing of a sleeping child, anything seemed possible. Even love at last in the most unexpected form. The silence in Victoria's BMW felt suffocating as they drove away from Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. Little Emma finally quiet in her car seat after the doctors had declared her healthy and safe. What should have been a moment of relief had transformed into something far more devastating. The weight of unspoken truths crushing down on both women like the humid Georgia air before a storm. Jasmine stared out the passenger window at the sprawling cityscape of Atlanta, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. The meeting with Child Protective Services had gone smoothly. Too smoothly. Victoria's connections, her lawyers, her carefully crafted explanations had painted a picture of temporary mental health struggles and family crisis management that the social workers had accepted with professional sympathy. But Jasmine knew the truth was far more complicated than the sanitized version Victoria had presented. And now, as they headed back toward Buckhead, She could feel the fragile bridge they'd built over the past few days beginning to crumble beneath the weight of unequal power and uncomfortable realities. "The lawyers will handle everything from here," Victoria said finally, her voice crisp and businesslike, the same tone she'd used during their first interview 8 months ago. "There shouldn't be any legal complications. Emma will be placed with appropriate family members in Charleston, and we can all move forward." The casual dismissal hit Jasmine like a physical blow. Move forward. As if the past 3 days had been nothing more than an inconvenient interruption in Victoria's perfectly ordered life. As if Emma was just another problem to be solved with money and influence. "That's it." Jasmine's voice came out sharper than she'd intended. "We just move forward. Pretend none of this happened." Victoria's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "What exactly did you expect, Jasmine? This isn't a fairy tale. Emma has a family, proper family, who can provide for her in ways that—" She paused, catching herself before the words could fully escape. "In what ways that what?" Jasmine pressed, turning in her seat despite the awkward pull of her seatbelt over her pregnant belly. "In ways that I can't. Because I'm the help. Because I live in East Atlanta instead of Buckhead." The accusation hung between them like a live wire, sparking with all the unspoken tensions of race and class that had simmered beneath their unlikely partnership. Victoria's jaw tightened, her perfect composure finally showing hairline cracks. "Don't make this about that," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "This is about what's best for Emma. She needs stability, resources, a proper family structure." "A proper family structure?" Jasmine's laugh was bitter, hollow, like the one that left her locked in a room for God knows how long? Like the one that had you so broken you couldn't even look at her without falling apart. Victoria pulled into the circular driveway of the Buckhead mansion with more force than necessary, the BMW's tires crunching against the pristine gravel. She cut the engine and sat staring straight ahead, her breathing shallow and controlled. "You don't understand," Victoria whispered, and for a moment she sounded like the broken woman Jasmine had held in the hospital corridor. "You can't understand what it's like to have everything you touch turn to ash. My daughter, my marriage, even my attempts to help Emma. I destroy everything I try to love." Jasmine felt her anger wavering in the face of Victoria's raw pain, but she couldn't let it go. Not when Emma's future hung in the balance. Not when the connection they'd forged felt so real, so desperately needed by all 3 of them. "That's not true," she said softly. "You saved her life by calling me that day. You trusted me when you didn't trust anyone else. We saved her together, Victoria. Doesn't that mean something?" Victoria finally turned to look at her, and Jasmine was startled by the tears streaming down her face, the first genuine emotion she'd shown since they'd left the hospital. "It means everything," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "And that's exactly why it has to end here. Don't you see? I can't be what she needs. I can't be what you need. I'm poison, Jasmine. Everyone who gets close to me gets hurt." The words hit Jasmine like ice water. She recognized the tone, the finality of someone who had already made up their mind, who was cutting ties to prevent further damage. It was the same tone her own mother had used when she dropped her at her grandmother's house with a suitcase and a promise to come back when things got better. Things never got better. So that's it. Jasmine's voice cracked with emotion she couldn't contain. "You're just going to push us away? Send Emma off to strangers and pretend none of this mattered?" Victoria wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. I'm going to do what I should have done from the beginning. I'm going to let professionals handle this situation appropriately." The word situation landed like a slap. Emma wasn't a situation. She was a little girl who had responded to Jasmine's voice, who had smiled when Jasmine sang to her, who deserved more than being shuffled between people who saw her as an obligation rather than a blessing. "And what about me?" Jasmine asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "What about us? I thought, after everything we've been through together." Victoria's face hardened, the wealthy socialite reasserting herself over the vulnerable woman who had wept in Jasmine's arms. "You're my employee, Jasmine. A very good employee, and I appreciate everything you've done. There will be a substantial bonus in your next paycheck, of course. Enough to cover your maternity expenses and then some." The words hit Jasmine like physical blows. Employee, bonus, paycheck. All the intimacy, all the connection, all the moments of genuine human understanding reduced to a business transaction. She felt something vital breaking inside her chest. Not just her heart, but her hope that things could be different, that she could matter to someone beyond her ability to clean their floors and maintain their facade. "Get out," Jasmine whispered. "What?" "Get out of the car. I need a minute." Victoria hesitated, perhaps recognizing that she'd gone too far, said too much. But the damage was done, and they both knew it. She climbed out of the BMW and walked toward the mansion's front door, her heels clicking against the stone with mechanical precision. Jasmine sat alone in the passenger seat, her hands pressed against her belly where her daughter kicked in agitated response to her mother's distress. Through the windshield, she could see Victoria's silhouette in the doorway, hesitant, as if waiting for Jasmine to follow, to return to their established roles of employer and employee. But Jasmine couldn't move. The past 3 days had shown her a different life, a different version of herself. She had been a protector, a mother figure, a true partner in something that mattered. She had felt valued not for her cleaning skills or her ability to remain invisible, but for her heart, her instincts, her very essence as a woman and soon-to-be mother. Now Victoria wanted to stuff all of that back into the neat box labeled domestic help, and Jasmine realized with crushing clarity that she couldn't do it. She couldn't go back to being invisible, not after being seen so completely. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her sister Keisha. "How's the white lady situation? You coming to dinner Sunday?" The casual normalcy of the message made Jasmine laugh through her tears. Her real life was still waiting for her. Her family, her community, people who loved her without needing to overcome their class prejudices first. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe some bridges were too wide to cross, some differences too fundamental to overcome. She gathered her purse and climbed out of the BMW, her pregnant body moving with careful dignity. Through the mansion's windows, she could see Victoria watching from the living room, her face a mask of careful composure that couldn't quite hide the devastation underneath. Jasmine walked to her own car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that suddenly felt more honest than all of Victoria's luxury, and drove away from Buckhead without looking back. Behind her, in the mansion that had never truly been a home, Victoria Whitmore stood surrounded by beautiful objects and crushing loneliness, watching the best thing that had ever happened to her disappear into the Atlanta traffic. Neither woman saw Emma's tiny face in the back window of the social services van as it pulled away from the hospital, heading toward an uncertain future with relatives who would provide for her physical needs while remaining strangers to her heart. The 3 lives that had become so beautifully, impossibly intertwined were being pulled apart by forces stronger than love, pride, fear, and the terrible weight of a world that insisted some boundaries could never be crossed. But sometimes, when love is real and deep enough, it finds a way to call people back to each other, no matter how far they've run or how firmly they've closed the door. What do you think breaks people's hearts more? Losing someone you love, or pushing them away because you're afraid of not being good enough? Share your thoughts about second chances below. Atlanta, Georgia, Grady Hospital and beyond. The fluorescent lights of Grady Hospital's waiting room buzzed like angry wasps above Jasmine's head as she sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands folded protectively over her belly. 3 days had passed since that terrible morning when she'd found baby Emma crying in the third-floor nursery. 3 days since Victoria's world had shattered like expensive crystal on marble floors. The social workers had come and gone, their clipboards and concerned expressions a familiar dance Jasmine recognized from her own childhood in the foster system. Child Protective Services had taken Emma into emergency custody while they investigated the circumstances that had led to a newborn being hidden away in a mansion's secret room, tended only by a woman drowning in postpartum depression and prescription pills. Jasmine shifted in her chair, feeling her own baby's restless movements. The doctors had insisted on monitoring her after the stress of that day. Her blood pressure had spiked dangerously high when the paramedics arrived, when she'd held Victoria's trembling form as the truth came pouring out in broken sobs and desperate confessions. "I couldn't let them take her," Victoria had whispered that day, mascara streaming down her face like black rivers. "After the miscarriages, after the doctors said I'd never. She was supposed to be my miracle. James's miracle. But I couldn't. I couldn't be what she needed." Now, sitting in this sterile hospital corridor, Jasmine faced the choice that would define not just her future, but the futures of 2 babies who had become intertwined by fate and circumstance. The social worker, Ms. Chen, had explained the situation with clinical detachment. Emma needed a home, and Victoria needed help. The Whitmore's adoption had been illegal, orchestrated through desperate connections and sealed with money rather than love. But Emma wasn't going back to the system. Not if Jasmine could help it. "Mrs. Washington." A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Patricia Williams, the black female physician who'd been monitoring Jasmine's pregnancy, approached with a gentle smile. "How are you feeling today?" "Confused," Jasmine answered honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared. Like I'm standing at a crossroads and every direction leads somewhere I've never been before." Dr. Williams pulled up a chair beside her, breaking protocol in the way that good doctors sometimes did when compassion overruled procedure. "The social worker told me about the proposal. About what you're considering." Jasmine nodded, her throat tight with emotion. The proposal was unprecedented, audacious, and completely terrifying. Victoria, in a moment of clarity between her breakdown and her admission to psychiatric care, had made a request that nobody had seen coming. She wanted Jasmine to adopt Emma. Not just take her in, adopt her completely, legally, permanently. Victoria would sign away all rights, ensuring that Emma could never be taken back on a whim or used as a pawn in some future emotional game. In return, Victoria would pay for everything. The legal fees, Jasmine's prenatal care, a trust fund for both children's futures, and a house in Decatur where Jasmine could raise them both without the weight of financial worry. "I keep thinking about what she said," Jasmine murmured, watching the busy hospital corridor through tired eyes. "About how she saw me with Emma that day, how I just knew what to do. She said she'd been watching me for months, seeing how I worked, how I cared about things. She said she knew I'd love Emma the way she deserved to be loved." Dr. Williams was quiet for a moment, her dark eyes thoughtful. "And what do you think about that?" "I think she's right," Jasmine admitted, the words coming from a place deeper than conscious thought. "I think I loved that baby from the moment I heard her crying. Not because she was Victoria's, not because she was abandoned, but because she was there and she needed someone and I I have love to give. But I'm scared, Jasmine whispered, tears threatening to spill. I'm scared I'm not enough. I'm scared I'll mess this up. I'm a single mother who cleans houses for a living. And now I'm supposed to raise 2 babies? What if I can't give them what they need? What if I'm just setting us all up for failure? Dr. Williams reached over and took Jasmine's hand, her touch warm and reassuring. Can I tell you something? I grew up in Vine City, raised by a grandmother who worked 3 jobs to keep food on our table. She couldn't give me designer clothes or private schools or trips to Europe. But she gave me something more valuable. She gave me the certainty that I was loved, that I mattered, that I could become anything I dreamed of being. Jasmine looked up, meeting the doctor's steady gaze. Love isn't about money or perfect circumstances, Dr. Williams continued. It's about showing up every day, even when you're tired and scared and don't know what you're doing. It's about being the safe harbor in someone's storm. And from everything I've observed, you already know how to do that. The truth of those words settled into Jasmine's chest like a warm coal, spreading heat through her doubt and fear. She thought about her own childhood, bouncing between foster homes and relatives who saw her as a burden rather than a blessing. She thought about the vow she'd made to herself years ago, that if she ever had children, they would never doubt they were wanted, never question whether they belonged. Victoria wants to see you, Dr. Williams said softly, before you make your final decision. She's in the psychiatric wing, stable but fragile. She asked if you'd give her the chance to explain herself, to ask for your forgiveness face to face. Jasmine's first instinct was to refuse. She'd spent her entire adult life avoiding the emotional minefields of her employer's personal dramas, keeping her head down and her heart protected. But something had shifted in her that day she'd found Emma. Some wall had crumbled, some door had opened that couldn't be closed again. Okay, she said finally. I'll see her. The walk to the psychiatric wing felt like a journey across continents. With each step, Jasmine felt the weight of her decisions settling around her like a mantle. By the time she reached Victoria's room, she knew what her answer would be. Victoria looked smaller somehow, diminished by the hospital gown and the absence of her usual armor of perfection. Her hair hung limp around her shoulders, her face pale and drawn without makeup. But her eyes held a clarity that had been missing for months. Jasmine, she breathed, struggling to sit up straighter. I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't, Jasmine replied honestly, taking the chair beside the bed. But we need to finish this conversation. Victoria nodded, tears already gathering in her eyes. I need you to understand what I did keeping Emma like that. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was so lost, so desperate to be a mother that I convinced myself it was love. But love doesn't hide in the shadows. Love doesn't make excuses. Why me? Jasmine asked the question that had been burning in her chest for 3 days. Out of all the families who want to adopt, all the people with money and resources, why ask me? Because, Victoria said, her voice breaking, in all the months you worked in my house, you never once looked at me with judgment. You saw past the mess I was making of everything and treated me with kindness I didn't deserve. And when you held Emma that day, when you sang to her and made her stop crying, I saw what real love looked like. I saw what I wanted to be but couldn't figure out how to become. Jasmine felt her own tears start to fall. I'm scared, Victoria. I'm scared I won't be enough for her, for either of them. You're already enough, Victoria whispered fiercely. You're already more than enough. Emma stopped crying the moment you picked her up. She knew, even at 3 weeks old, that you were her real mother. The universe just took a roundabout way of bringing you two together." They sat in silence for a moment, two women from different worlds bound together by love for the same child, by the recognition that sometimes the most important choices are the ones that terrify us most. "There's something else," Victoria said softly. "The house in Decatur, it's not charity. It's not me trying to ease my guilt. It's me trying to give Emma the childhood I never had, the security I never felt. I want her to grow up knowing she has a home that can't be taken away, a mother who chose her completely and forever." Jasmine closed her eyes, feeling her own baby's strong kicks against her ribs. Two children, different as night and day, both depending on her to make the right choice. Both deserve a mother brave enough to love them without reservation. "I'll do it," she said quietly, the words carrying the weight of a sacred vow. "I'll take Emma home. I'll love her like she's mine because she will be mine. Completely and forever." Victoria's sob was equal parts grief and relief, the sound of a woman finally releasing a burden she'd never been strong enough to carry. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving her. Thank you for saving us both." As Jasmine left the hospital that evening, walking out into the warm Atlanta twilight, she felt the future stretching before her like an uncharted country. Tomorrow, the lawyers will start the paperwork. Next week, she'd move into the house in Decatur with its nursery already prepared and its promise of new beginnings. But tonight, she drove back to her small apartment in East Atlanta, her hands steady on the wheel, her heart full of a terrifying, exhilarating certainty. She was going to be a mother to two little girls who needed her, and for the first time in her life, she felt worthy of the title. The choice was made. The future was waiting. And love, unexpected, transformative, redemptive love, had won. 3 months later, Piedmont Park, Atlanta. The autumn leaves danced across the rolling hills of Piedmont Park, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson that rivaled any masterpiece hanging in the High Museum. Jasmine pushed the stroller along the winding path, her 3-week-old daughter Amelia sleeping peacefully beneath a soft pink blanket that still smelled faintly of the hospital. Her phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Running 5 minutes late. Save me some of that peach cobbler." Jasmine smiled, remembering how impossible such casual communication would have seemed just months ago. The woman who had once been her distant employer was now... what? Friend seemed too simple a word for what had grown between them through the fire of that terrible, beautiful day when everything changed. She settled onto their usual bench overlooking the lake, the same spot where they'd first talked, really talked, after the trial ended. Where Victoria had broken down completely, admitting that she'd been drowning in postpartum depression so severe she couldn't trust herself around Emma. Where Jasmine had held her while she sobbed, understanding finally that wealth couldn't protect anyone from the darkness that sometimes followed new life. "There you are." Victoria's voice carried genuine warmth as she approached, Emma toddling beside her on unsteady legs, her chubby hands grasping Victoria's fingers for balance. The transformation in both of them was remarkable. Victoria's face had softened, her designer armor replaced by jeans and a simple sweater that actually looked lived in. Emma, once pale and listless, now glowed with health and curiosity, her blue eyes bright with the kind of trust that could only come from feeling truly safe. "Mama Jazzy!" Emma squealed, breaking free from Victoria to wrap her tiny arms around Jasmine's legs. The words still sent a jolt of joy through Jasmine's heart. She was Mama to her own daughter, but Mama Jazzy to Emma, a title that had evolved naturally as the little girl learned to navigate having two mothers who loved her fiercely. "Hey, sweet girl," Jasmine laughed, lifting Emma onto her lap while being careful not to disturb Amelia. "Did you have fun at Miss Sarah's music class?" "I played drums." Emma announced proudly, patting out a rhythm on Jasmine's arm that was surprisingly close to what they'd been practicing. Victoria settled beside them on the bench, immediately peering into the stroller with the expression of someone still amazed by the miracle of new life. "How's our little angel today?" Our little angel. The possessive pronoun no longer felt strange. Through the legal proceedings, the custody arrangements, the careful reconstruction of their lives, they'd become something unprecedented. A family forged not by blood or law, but by choice and circumstance and love. "She's perfect," Jasmine said, adjusting Amelia's blanket. "Dr. Martinez says her weight gain is right on track. And she slept for 4 straight hours last night." "Blessed relief." Victoria laughed, and the sound was so different from the brittle social laughter Jasmine remembered from their early days. This was real joy, hard-won and deeply felt. "I remember those early weeks with Emma feeling like some sort of endurance test designed by cruel gods." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching other families enjoy the park. A group of children played on the playground while their parents chatted nearby. Joggers traced the perimeter paths. An elderly couple fed ducks at the water's edge, their movements synchronized by decades of shared routine. "I got the call from my publisher today," Victoria said quietly. Emma had found a stick and was drawing patterns in the dirt at their feet, completely absorbed in her artistic endeavors. Jasmine turned to study Victoria's face. The book had been her idea, or rather her therapist's idea, implemented with Jasmine's encouragement. A memoir about postpartum depression, about the myths of maternal instinct, about how sometimes loving your child means admitting you need help. Victoria had been writing it in stolen moments between Emma's naps and therapy sessions, pouring her truth onto pages that might help other women facing the same dark waters. "And," Jasmine prompted, "they want it." Victoria's voice carried wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe her own words. "They're calling it powerful and necessary. There's going to be an advance that's, well, it's substantial." "Victoria, that's incredible." Jasmine reached over to squeeze her hand, feeling Emma lean more heavily against her as the little girl grew drowsy in the afternoon sunshine. "I want to split it with you," Victoria said quickly, before Jasmine could object. "Don't argue, I know that look. You saved Emma's life. You saved mine. This book exists because you had the courage to open that door when I couldn't." Jasmine felt tears prick her eyes, remembering that moment that seemed both yesterday and a lifetime ago. The crying baby. The locked door. The choice to act instead of ignore. You would have found your way back to her eventually. Maybe. But maybe not in time. Victoria's voice grew serious. "I was so lost, Jasmine. The depression was like being trapped underwater, and I kept thinking that Emma would be better off without me. That she deserved a mother who felt joy when she looked at her, not this crushing weight of inadequacy and fear." Emma had fallen asleep against Jasmine's shoulder, her small body warm and trusting. Jasmine stroked her hair, marveling at how this child had brought them all together in the most unexpected way. "What about Richard?" Jasmine asked. Victoria's husband had fought the divorce at first, unable to understand how his carefully constructed life had crumbled so completely. But the evidence of his emotional absence, his affairs, his refusal to acknowledge Victoria's struggles, had been overwhelming. The settlement had been generous, leaving Victoria with the house, significant assets, and most importantly, full custody of Emma. "His lawyer called yesterday," Victoria said with a slight edge to her voice. "He wants visitation rights established. Apparently, his new girlfriend thinks playing stepmother might be fun." "What did you tell them?" "The same thing I've been telling them for months. When he's ready to commit to actual parenting, therapy, consistency, putting Emma's needs first, we can discuss supervised visits. Until then, she's better off with us. Us. There was that word again, casual and profound all at once. They'd created something unprecedented, a partnership that transcended traditional categories. Jasmine lived in the renovated carriage house behind the main estate, close enough to help with Emma but private enough to maintain her own space with Amelia. Victoria had insisted on paying her a salary that reflected her true role. Not just household help, but co-parent, partner, friend. "I have news too," Jasmine said, shifting Emma to a more comfortable position. "I heard back from Georgia State about their social work program." Victoria's face lit up. "And I got in. Full scholarship. Plus they have an on-campus childcare program that will take both girls." Jasmine had been working toward this dream for months, encouraged by Victoria to pursue the education she'd always wanted but never believed she could afford. "Jasmine, that's wonderful." Victoria's joy was infectious, and even sleeping Emma seemed to smile at the sound of celebration. "You're going to help so many families. You have such a gift for seeing what people need, even when they can't see it themselves." A young couple walked past pushing a stroller, the woman clearly pregnant with their second child. They moved with the easy confidence of people who had never questioned their right to happiness, their assumption that love would be enough to solve any problem. Jasmine watched them with a mix of envy and hope, envy for their certainty, hope that her own daughters might someday take such security for granted. "Do you ever wonder," Victoria asked quietly, following her gaze, "what would have happened if you hadn't been there that day? If you had just ignored the crying?" Jasmine considered the question seriously. It haunted her sometimes, the knowledge of how close they'd all come to tragedy. Victoria's postpartum depression had been spiraling towards something unthinkable. Emma had been failing to thrive, locked away while her mother battled demons she couldn't name. Without intervention, the story might have ended very differently. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remember what my grandmother used to say. The Lord puts us where we need to be when we need to be there. Maybe I was supposed to be cleaning your house that day. Maybe Emma was supposed to cry loud enough for me to hear. Maybe all of this was meant to happen exactly as it did." Victoria nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I used to think everything that happened for a reason was something people said to make sense of senseless things. But looking at Emma now, at how far we've all come, maybe your grandmother was right." Amelia stirred in her stroller, making the small sounds that meant she was waking up hungry. Jasmine began gathering their things, the practiced movements of new motherhood already becoming second nature. "Same time next week?" Victoria asked, lifting a sleepy Emma into her arms. "Wouldn't miss it," Jasmine replied. "Though next week I want to hear more about this book tour they're planning for you. My friend is going to be famous." "Our friend," Victoria corrected gently. "This story belongs to both of us." They parted ways at the parking lot, Victoria heading back to Buckhead with Emma, Jasmine driving toward her new life in the carriage house that no longer felt like servants' quarters but like home. As she drove, she thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that moment of terror and discovery to this afternoon of ordinary, extraordinary happiness. Her phone buzzed with a photo from Victoria. Emma at the kitchen table, carefully drawing stick figures in crayon. The image showed 3 people holding hands, 2 tall figures and 1 small one between them, all smiling under a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, in Victoria's neat handwriting, Emma's family portrait. She insisted on the exact colors for everyone. Looking at this unconventional family that formed through crisis and choice, What does family mean to you? Share your thoughts about the different ways we can find and create the love we need. Jasmine pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment, looking up at the main house where lights were beginning to come on in the early evening darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Amelia's pediatrician appointment, Emma's playdate, Victoria's therapy session, the endless juggling act of building a life from scratch. But tonight there was peace. She thought about the baby who had cried out in the darkness, calling her to action when action seemed impossible. She thought about the woman who had been drowning in her own despair until someone threw her a lifeline. She thought about herself, 8 months pregnant and invisible, who had found the courage to open a door when it would have been safer to walk away. Sometimes salvation came in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes it looked like a pregnant maid with nothing to lose and everything to give. Sometimes it looked like a broken mother learning to trust again. Sometimes it looked like two women from completely different worlds discovering that love could bridge any gap, overcome any obstacle, create any kind of family their hearts could imagine. As Jasmine lifted her sleeping daughter from the car seat, she whispered the same words she'd spoken that first terrible, beautiful day. "Don't worry, baby. Mama's here. Everything's going to be all right." This time she knew it was true. The autumn wind rustled through the oak trees surrounding the Buckhead estate, carrying with it the promise of change, of seasons turning, of lives being lived with intention and hope. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour, their bronze voices proclaiming that love, in all its unexpected forms, would always find a way to prevail. And in a renovated carriage house behind a Georgian mansion, 3 generations of women settled in for the night. Grandmother Amelia sleeping in her bassinet, little Emma dreaming of tomorrow's adventures, and their mothers planning a future built on the unshakable foundation of choosing each other again and again, every single day. As we close this story of unexpected family and unconditional love, tell us, what moment of courage in your own life led to the biggest positive change? Sometimes our bravest moments come when we choose to care for others even when it's not our responsibility. Share your story below. Thanks for sticking with this story till the very end. But trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. The next story is crazier, more shocking, and will blow your mind. Click the image on your screen now and dive right in. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a single twist.